Aaron, I'm trying to make this video to help troubleshoot any kind of or some kinds of problems with Azure, the Azure AD conditional access integration between Workspace ONE and Azure. So we're going to start with a blank slate. We're going to set up the integration and then try to purposely break it and then try to recover from that. This won't cover all scenarios, but it will show some basics of hopefully whatever scenario you are in. Hopefully you can just clear everything out, start from scratch, and then recover that way. So I'm in directory services in the UEM. This is a SaaS hosted tenant, and so I don't have the compliance set up here with Azure AD. So on the Azure AD side, I'm in Enterprise Applications. You can see I don't have any Enterprise Applications. When I set this up, there will be one called Workspace ONE Conditional Access that's created for me by this broker service when I configure it here. Before I can successfully do that, though, I need to come to the Intune side or MEM side, and I need to go to the partner compliance management, and I need to add the partner compliance. So you should just need one policy, but I will add a policy for Android and iOS. I don't believe the policies have to be assigned to any particular group. I've had success with assigning it and with a group and not assigning it. So I'm going to add back the iOS one. So in the Microsoft documentation, it does state you can only have one partner compliance integration per platform. So it should be very straightforward, because every time I go to create one, so I've created one for Android and iOS here. Now if I try to create another one, my only choice is macOS. And if I tried maybe with a different MDM, such as Mobile Iron, I still can only do macOS. So it should be fairly straightforward. So we'll refresh here. So you can see the status is terminated. That's from the previous time I set that up. When I do get this set up, this should flip to active, and then the last successful sync time should change. Okay, so now we're ready to begin. So I'm going to enable the use compliance and Azure conditional access policies. I'm going to enable it specifically for iOS and Android. And now here it's telling me I'm going to be redirected to Azure to basically complete the integration. So what this is doing is it's going to there's a Workspace ONE broker service that's going to create an OAuth application on the Azure AD side. I need that application needs to have specific permissions to the Microsoft Graph API and some other APIs. So I need to authenticate to Azure with an admin account. So I'm using, and this is my Azure AD lab, I guess, and so this is like a global administrator account here. So when I authenticate with this account, I'm going to then grant permissions to the Workspace ONE Conditional Access OAuth application. So here's a list of some of the permissions that I'm about to grant. It says you have successfully authenticated to Azure AD. Please close this page to continue. So I'll close. Now I'm back in the Workspace ONE UEM, and now you see it's flipped to this complete integration. So I'll click that complete button. All right, so it won't, briefly there it did say success. So I'll scroll back down. Here it is, last successful. Okay. So now we'll go back to Enterprise Applications. I'll click refresh. There's my Workspace ONE Conditional Access. One thing I noticed is every time this app gets created by the Workspace ONE broker, it's always created with the same application ID. and this is really important. So I would document this application ID, because you can use, there's a URL you can call with using your Microsoft Azure AD tenant ID and then this application ID to manually recover this app. If, for instance, if I were to delete this now and then try to disable compliance on the Workspace ONE side, this will definitely fail. And I'll never be able to get out of this screen. I'll never be able to disable these buttons and then go back through the setup to recreate the Workspace ONE Conditional Access app. So document the application ID, because this does appear to be used over and over. So we have our app now, and just to show the permissions, we'll come down to permissions, and here are some of the permissions I was talking about. So in the event that you need to re-grant permissions, so say a new permission is needed for this app to work, like say Microsoft changes some of their APIs, you would need to come grant the permission here. So this is one way you can do it on the Microsoft side, is click this grant admin consent. So I'll just go ahead and click through it just to show you what it looks like. But essentially you can see it's the same thing. Workspace ONE Conditional Access, here's the permissions, and then I'm just granting it, and then grant successful. All right, so back, now that we have the app created, if I refresh my partner compliance policies, this will flip to active, and then again the updates. Okay, so now the Workspace ONE documentation says, to disable this, you shouldn't remove those partner compliance policies. So that's these. Don't just delete these. And then it says you shouldn't delete the Workspace ONE Conditional Access app. That's the enterprise application. So it's this one here. And here's how, if I go to properties, I have the option to now delete this. In my testing, this isn't 100% true. I didn't document every permutation, but I was able to delete one of these and still recover. And you can delete both and still also recover. It's possible to do that. What it does say to do is, first, if you do want to deactivate this, it says first you really need to deactivate on the Workspace ONE UEM side. After that's done, then you could go and that should be really it. But you could come back and then remove these right here. You don't have to delete the enterprise application. I don't believe, since it's not really by default. It's not. Well, I guess it's assigned to all users, but you could unassign this if you're unsure. But there is a way to delete it and then recover. So go ahead and just do that. So we're going to delete this. All right, so the app's deleted. I'm going to refresh here. This will remain active because it's more of a tie-in with Workspace ONE. But I'm going to delete these. Alrighty. And so now, when I try to disable, I'll get a failure. So I'm going to disable the compliance here. So I'm disabling the Azure Conditional Access policies, the integration with Azure, and click Save, and it says disable of Azure AD for compliance failed. And sometimes I'll have another, actually it's during integration, I'll have another, when you enable it, you have sometimes another error message down here. And so you can see now I'm back in this state where I just cannot disable it and go through the process again. And there's no way to manually, you cannot manually recreate it, because when you the enterprise app, because when you do create one manually, it's going to have a totally different application ID, and the Workspace ONE broker is not going to be aware of that ID, so it's not going to trigger. So there's definitely a way to recover. So I'm going to show that to you now. I talked about needing the application ID and then your Azure tenant ID. So you can call this URL here, and this effectively does the same authorization when I was authenticating. To break down the URL, this part right here is your Azure tenant ID, and then the client ID, this is the application ID of the Workspace ONE Conditional Access Enterprise App. And then finally, the redirect URL, that should be your tenant, whatever SaaS tenant you're in. So I'm in CN 420. If you're in CN 135, you would just change this to CN 135, but leave this in place here. Okay, so I have I have the URL already built, but to show you where to get the Azure tenant ID, just in case, you can go to Azure Active Directory and then scroll down to Properties. Well, actually, sorry, it says it right here on the screen. So here's the tenant ID. You can copy that, and now you would have to have documented the enterprise application ID for the Workspace ONE Conditional Access, because again, there's no way to recover that. So assuming you do have that and you've constructed the URL accordingly, you can copy this, open a new tab, and here we're going through that same prompt where I select my account I want to authenticate with. I've authenticated. Now it's going to recreate the Workspace ONE Conditional Access with these permissions, which I'm granting right now. And so here's the redirect URL, and then it has the success message. If I go back to Enterprise Applications, refresh, I have this now. And then, nope. I'm not sure why it doesn't, let me refresh. Should allow me to view properties. Yeah. So again, this is the application ID that you would need right here, and that fits right here. That you want to use that as the client ID value in this URL. Okay, if I go back to the partner compliance, I shouldn't have anything. Just as a test here, we'll try to disable the integration, see what happens. Okay, so it failed. Okay, so I'll refresh. Okay, so I'm kind of still back in the same state. So what I believe we would need to do, because this is a prerequisite step to just even turning this on, we need to add back at least one of the policies. So I'm just going to do the Android, and I'm not going to assign it to any group. You can see it's active, and so now we'll come disable, see if we get lucky. There we go. So I'm going to refresh this just to show that it's disabled. Yep, now it's disabled. On my partner compliance, I'm going to refresh here. It should flip to terminated. There it is. I could optionally add in the iOS one, but it'll probably just show up as being terminated. Yep. And my enterprise application shouldn't be affected in any way. All right, so hopefully that's helpful. I know it's not the exact error you're faced with, but hopefully you can clear everything out and then just basically start from scratch and then create everything. Alrighty, thank you.